the haunting of Blackwood High. Blackwood High had always been an eerie place, even before the rumors started. Located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dark woods and mist, it had a reputation for being haunted, though no one could quite say why. The older students whispered about the strange occurrences, lights flickering in empty classrooms, shadowy figures glimpsed in the corners of hallways, and the chilling sound of footsteps echoing through the abandoned parts of the school late at night. But it wasn't until Emma transferred there in her junior year that she began to experience it firsthand. From her first day, Emma felt something wasn't quite right. The school was unsettlingly quiet, even during the busiest hours. She could always hear her own footsteps, and the sound of lockers opening and closing seemed muffled, as though the walls themselves were swallowing the noise. The teachers were strange, too. Mrs. Larson, her history teacher, had an unnerving way of looking at the students, as though she was seeing something beyond them, something only she could comprehend. And the janitor, Mr. Hale, never seemed to leave. He'd sweep the same hallway for hours, mumbling to himself in a language Emma couldn't place. One afternoon, Emma stayed after school to finish a project in the library. The building was nearly deserted, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. As she worked, she felt an odd pressure in the air, as though the very space around her was growing heavier with each passing minute. The shadows stretched longer, clinging to the walls, and the temperature dropped, her breath visible in the air. She shook it off as nothing more than a trick of her mind. But then, she heard something, a whisper. Emma. The voice was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. It seemed to come from the back of the library. Her heart skipped. She wasn't alone. Tentatively, she walked toward the sound. It was coming from behind a stack of old books, a place she had never noticed before. Her fingers brushed the edges of the shelf, and with a creak, the books slid open, revealing a hidden door. Without thinking, she stepped inside. The room beyond was dark, so dark that she couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the walls seemed to close in around her. Then she heard it again, the whisper, now closer, more insistent. Help me. She fumbled for her phone, using the weak flashlight to scan the room. Her light flickered across the walls, and for a moment she thought she saw something. Someone standing in the corner. A tall, thin figure, draped in shadows, its face obscured. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. The whisper grew louder, almost frantic now. Emma backed away, her heart racing. But as she turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. Panicked, she pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Her phone flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. She was trapped. The whispers surrounded her now from all directions, a chorus of desperate voices that seemed to be coming from the very walls themselves. Help me, you shouldn't be here. Leave. Suddenly, a cold hand brushed against her arm. Emma screamed, spinning around, but no one was there. The temperature in the room dropped to freezing, and she could see her breath clouding in the air. A figure emerged from the shadows, this time clearly visible, a tall woman with hollow eyes and a twisted, bloodless smile. Her mouth opened, and the whispers turned to a horrifying wail. You shouldn't have come here. In a panic, Emma lunged for the door, throwing her weight against it. It groaned and finally cracked open, allowing her to tumble out into the hallway. She didn't stop running until she was outside, gasping for breath, the dark woods looming like a silent watcher in the distance. That night, she barely slept. The faces of the shadows haunted her dreams, their whispers echoing in her ears. She tried to tell her friends, but no one believed her. They laughed it off as just a bad experience, a trick of her mind. But the next morning, when Emma went to class, she noticed something unsettling. The walls were covered in new scratches, deep gouges, as though something or someone had been trying to escape. And when she passed the library on her way to the cafeteria, she swore she saw movement through the windows, figures pacing back and forth, trapped inside. As the days went by, Emma began to notice that she wasn't the only one hearing the whispers anymore. Students who had never mentioned anything about the school's strange history started to talk about the voices, the shadows, the coldness. The rumors, it seemed, were true. Blackwood High wasn't just haunted, it was alive, a place where the dead could speak, and those who listened were never truly safe. By the end of the month, Emma knew what she had to do. The only way to escape Blackwood High was to forget, to leave the school behind and never look back. But as she packed her things, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. And from somewhere deep within the school, she heard it one last time. "You can never leave." The whispers were now inside her head. The whispering hallway. It was the middle of my sophomore year in high school when I first heard the whispers. Our school was old, over 100 years old, and had a reputation for being haunted. There were always rumors among the students about strange happenings, flickering lights, doors slamming shut on their own, and the feeling that someone was watching you when you were alone. Most of us shrugged it off as urban legends, but that all changed one afternoon. I was staying late after school to finish an assignment. I liked to study in the library, which was located at the far end of the second floor. The hallway leading to it was dimly lit, even in the daytime, with only a few small windows that let in weak light. I had been working for about an hour when I decided to take a break and grab a drink from the vending machine. As I walked through the hallway, I heard the soft sound of whispers. At first I thought it was just the air conditioning or maybe a group of students in a classroom nearby, but the voices grew louder, as if they were right behind me. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there, just an empty, dimly lit hallway stretching out behind me. I froze for a moment, listening. The whispers weren't normal. They were quiet, but they sounded like words, like conversations, but I couldn't make out anything specific. The air felt cold, and a strange pressure settled in my chest. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, but the whispers followed. They seemed to be growing more insistent, like they were trying to tell me something. By the time I reached the vending machine, I was practically running, my heart racing in my chest. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. I grabbed a soda quickly, turned, and started back down the hallway. That's when it happened. I swear I heard my name being called. A faint, soft voice from behind me, just barely audible. But when I looked, there was no one in sight. My pulse shot up. The whispers stopped, but the feeling of being watched didn't. I hurried back to the library, my footsteps echoing in the empty hall, and locked myself inside. When I told my friends the next day, they looked at me like I was crazy, but I wasn't the only one who had experienced it. Several others, including some of the teachers, had heard the whispers in that hallway over the years. Some believed it was the spirit of a former student who had tragically died in the building decades ago. Others thought it was just a quirk of the old building, but no one really knew for sure. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed whenever I passed through that hallway. I didn't stay late at school again for months, and though I never heard the whispers again, I always felt as though something or someone was just out of sight, watching. To this day, I still avoid that hallway when I can. The haunting of Maplewood High. Maplewood High was a school like any other, nestled in a quiet town where the old brick walls and creaky floors gave the building a sense of history. But there was something different about room 212. It was the last classroom on the second floor, tucked away at the far end of the hall. The door was always locked, even when no one had been inside for hours. Students whispered about it, but no one dared to ask questions. It started with Sarah, a freshman who had transferred to Maplewood in the middle of the semester. She was quiet, bookish, and had an odd fascination with the school's history. One afternoon during her lunch break, she overheard some seniors talking about the old room. Room 212, one of them scoffed. They say a teacher died in there years ago. Nobody knows how, but sometimes. You can feel her presence. Sarah was intrigued. That evening, she couldn't shake the story from her mind. She decided to visit the room after school the next day, convinced it was all just a myth. As the final bell rang and the hallways cleared, she made her way up to the second floor. The hallway was eerily silent, the fluorescent lights flickering above her. When she reached the end of the corridor, she found the door to room 212 slightly ajar, just enough to peek inside. The classroom was empty. the desks arranged in neat rows, the chalkboard covered in faint, forgotten writing. She stepped inside, the air cold against her skin. The windows were sealed shut, but there was a strange draft that made her shiver. As she wandered to the back of the room, something caught her eye, a small, dusty book on the teacher's desk. It was old, the leather cover cracked and worn, as if it had been untouched for decades. Curiosity got the better of her, and she reached for it. The moment her fingers brushed the book's cover, a sharp, cold wind swept through the room. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. Then, she heard a soft, whispering voice, just beyond the reach of her hearing. She couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakable, the voice of a woman, distant but unmistakably urgent. Suddenly, the lights flickered out. The room was plunged into darkness. Panic surged through Sarah, and she scrambled to the door, trying to turn the handle. It wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, as if something or someone was moving closer. The cold intensified, and Sarah felt a presence behind her. Turning around slowly, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the dim light of the emergency exit sign, she saw a shadowy figure standing by the window. It was a woman, pale and thin, her face gaunt and her eyes wide with an expression of sorrow and anger. "Leave," the voice whispered again, but this time it was clearer. "Leave, before it's too late." Terrified, Sarah stumbled backward, her hand finally finding the door handle. She yanked it open, and the room instantly went silent. The figure was gone, the coldness evaporated, but Sarah didn't wait to see if it would return. She ran down the hall, out of the school, and didn't stop until she was home. The next day, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She told a few friends what had happened, but they all laughed it off, dismissing it as just an overactive imagination. But Sarah wasn't the same after that. She began to feel drawn to room 212, as if something was calling her back. One evening, when she could no longer resist, she returned to the school alone. The door to room 212 was unlocked this time, and she entered without hesitation. The classroom seemed unchanged, but as she stepped inside, a strange noise echoed through the room like the faint sound of someone writing on the chalkboard. She turned toward the board, and there, in neat, precise handwriting, were the words, "I didn't want to die." Before she could react, a figure appeared before her. The woman's face was pale, her features twisted in agony. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, only a rush of cold air. The lights flickered once more, and when they returned, the woman was gone. Sarah ran out of the room and never returned to the school again. The rumors about room 212 persisted, and to this day, no student dares to enter the room after hours. Some say the spirit of the teacher still lingers, trapped in the room by the tragic event that happened long ago. Others say the ghost is still waiting for someone to unlock the mystery of her death and to free her from the torment that keeps her bound to the classroom. But one thing is certain, room 212 remains locked at night, and no one ever dares to disturb the dead.